Hello, I'm Jacqueline Grady, and welcome to SUNY Oneonta's In Discussion. With me on today's program is author, poet, playwright, and artist Eric Gansworth. Eric is a professor of English and Lowry, writer-in-residence at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. A stage reading of his play, Patriot Act, was recently performed here at SUNY Oneonta. Welcome, Eric. You're a writer, you're a visual artist, and you're a professor. But before those things, you were born and raised at Tuscarora, Indian Nation in western New York. Can you talk a little bit about that and growing up there and how that was like for you?
Well, it's a very small community, maybe fewer than 1,500 people. My family's been there forever, and so it's a really close-knit community. And the way the school system is set up is that you go from kindergarten through the 5th grade, at least when I was a student, at the nation school, and so really you know pretty much everybody. You've been going to school your entire life, and then gradually at middle school we were sent out to the central school district, larger. So it's a great way for you to feel a continuance within your community, that you really get to know all of these people who you're going to know your entire life, because not a lot of people leave the area, so it's a way for the community to continue to exist.
Now you're a professor at Buffalo, and how's that for you? Do you enjoy it, and how long have you been there?
Yeah, it's a great place to work. I started off teaching at Niagara Community College, and I was there for a number of years. And the first 2 books have been published, and an administrator from Canisius College approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in moving, which was nice because I didn't really have to move physically. I could just commute to Buffalo. And that's been almost a decade. It was September 2001, very easy to remember. And they're incredibly supportive of my work, and it's been, I think, a really good match. I hope that I continue to provide for them things they value, because certainly they've provided tremendous opportunities for me to continue exploring things I want to.
So you are an enrolled member of the Onondaga Nation. Can you explain precisely what that is and what does it mean to be a member of that?
Okay. Our particular nations have, I guess what I would say, are explicit enrollment criteria. And what it means is that my mother and her mother and so on, all straight down through the line, are formally or had been formally enrolled members of the nation. So every one of their children continues to. It's kind of a strange system in that the whole culture is defined by one's mother. So whatever my father was, whatever his enrollment or non-enrollment were, doesn't really matter at all. So it's kind of strange that your identity is dictated solely by your mother's identity. And so even though we as Onondagas have been living, my family, specifically at the Tuscarora Nation, we aren't Tuscarora, so we remain very explicitly within ours, though our formal nation is closer to Syracuse. It's just outside of Syracuse.
Okay, so you've published books, and your first being The Indian Summers, and also novels, Mending Skins and Extra Indians. That's correct, right?
Yep.
Okay, so of all these books, what has been your favorite, and what do you feel was most accomplished, when it was all said and done?
I'm not sure that I ever do have a favorite. I think probably what you're working on right now is what you're most interested in. So usually that's not going to come out for years probably. Right. And I think because the process of getting a book published is fairly rigorous, by the time it gets out there, you really don't even want to see it again.
Yeah.
You're just tired of reading it over and over. So in that way, maybe the books that you're most distanced from seem probably a little better than they are. So I try kind of not to think about what's gone in the past, because I'm always focusing on the newer work.
Right. Do you have one that in particular you feel like you really felt very accomplished something great, when you were done with one?
I guess you do every time. You kind of have to believe that the book is what you wanted it to be, and I also think that is what most writers will tell you is that they don't let it go until it's gotten to that point. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that means 3 drafts, sometimes it means 9 drafts. For me, it's usually 7.
Yeah.
I don't systematically try to make it 7, but that tends to be at the point that a book gets accepted for publication.
Understandable. So you have a collection of paintings as well, and then I actually went on your website and I looked around a little bit at them, and one of my favorites were the smoke dancing, I believe it is. And can you just explain what your paintings are supposed to mean, maybe, or what you're trying to express through your paintings?
The paintings, probably over the last at least decade or so, have been really explicitly tied with the books, but they're not really illustrations for the books. Instead, they're kind of trying to work with the same thematic content, but visually instead. And so usually the way it's worked out is that they end up becoming images that open each section of a given book. But what I tend to do within them that's maybe a little bit different is that for a novel you need realistic characters who act in a meaningful way, and a painting can be much more impressionistic. And so the characters that appear in the paintings tend to be a little more on the symbolic side rather than a realistic side. And they engage sort of the contemporary world and a much more traditional iconography of the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, which both of my nations are part of. And so it's a way of exploring the same ideas in kind of parallel narratives.
Is it true that you have a painting in every book or some sort of visual art in every one of your books?
Thus far I have.
Any reason why you do that particularly, or just kind of goes with the book? Or?
Yeah, well, I just tend to be working on the same ideas simultaneously, and since I've kind of divided my time equally between painting and writing, usually those ideas have some kind of marriage. So it takes a long time to work on a piece, and so usually living with the ideas for several years. And because of that, inevitably the two sets of ideas eventually start merging.
What was your longest piece of work that you have done?
For a painting?
Yeah.
Wow. It's actually a piece I don't show anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think it took me 1.5 years to do. It was an just incredibly long investment in a painting.
Why don't you show it anymore? Can I ask that?
Yeah, I just don't think it's as skilled as other things.
Okay.
It was more about embracing the idea of what it was like to create a wampum belt, which are these belts made of very small beads that are just strung together in these very complicated, long patterns. And since it's the grounding force of our culture to have these belts, I wanted to get a sense of what it would feel like to create one. So it's a very large painting. It's, I want to say, 14 feet long.
Wow.
And it's made up of individually painted beads that are about 1 inch by 2 inches. So it's a very complicated but not particularly interesting painting.
Yeah. Well, it sounds complex, though, at the very least.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, and your first play, you do plays, right? Correct?
Yeah.
And was it called Recreation Story?
Yes.
Was that the first play? Okay.
Yep.
And it was selected for Public Theater's second annual Native Theater Festival.
Yes.
And can you describe what that experience was like for you, like, as far as a play, and then, you know, having it in the festival?
Well, it was a really a kind of a strange thing, actually. I had been invited to give a lecture on our creation story the year before, and it had to be a 3-hour lecture. And I don't really think many people can be interesting for 3 hours, and I was pretty sure that I couldn't. Yeah, so I was sort of intimidated by the idea of doing that, but because I had agreed to do it, I went forward. It took a lot of prep, and by the time I had finished the lecture, I was not overly satisfied with it. I didn't think that lecture was its final form. Mm-hmm. And I'd seen the call for work for the theater festival, and I thought, you know, this doesn't really exist for the page, so if I can rewrite it in some other way that would make it more engaging for an audience of viewers or listeners, it might have a different life there. So I went about, I read a number of experimental plays. I've been interested in performance art for a long time, and so I kept those kinds of constructs in mind too. And I just kind of wrote away, and then thought, well, I'll send it to that competition. It won't get in, and then that'll be that.
Yeah.
But it was accepted, and so that was very strange that it was accepted. I think some people were annoyed. People who are playwrights and who had been kind of working in the trenches for many years, and they felt it was an opportunity they should have had. But you know, I didn't do anything other than send a play into a competition, so I felt no qualms about that. It was really exciting to have it there. I mean, because the public is, you know, if you're an aspiring playwright, the public is one of the places you really want your work to wind up eventually. Yeah. Maybe not the first one. But I had also asked for some initial guidance on its length, and because it was kind of a long piece, and they said, well, it should be just as long as you want it to be, which was maybe not the right answer, because when we got there for rehearsals, it's a compressed schedule. It's maybe 3 days before the actual performance. We discovered that it was twice as long as it should be, so I spent much of the next 2 days listening to rehearsals, cutting, rewriting. So I'd rather go at a slower pace. But it was a great experience, and I had a terrific director and an awesome set of actors who really facilitated its coming forward.
Can I ask, how long was the initial piece?
3 hours. It still stayed 3 hours.
Still stayed 3 hours.
And by the time we got to the final rehearsal, or through the final rehearsal, it was maybe an hour before showtime, and we'd never gotten through the actual play, so we didn't know how long it was going to be. And as it turned out, it was like 1 minute under 2, which was what my director was shooting for. So she was happy.
It all worked out in the end, then, I guess. You also won the Penn Oakland 16th Annual Literary Award, and for your novel Mending Skins. Is that correct? Okay. And what does this award mean to you? And was this like, you know, your proudest moment, or what would you say was?
I was really excited about it. I think when you're a beginning writer, you sort of know what the awards are out there, and I suppose probably if you're kind of like a writing nerd, you pay attention to these things, and you think, wow, someday maybe I'll win a Penn Award if I really keep doing my work.
It's a great thing.
And so I was very excited when it happened. And totally out of the blue, I hadn't even known that my publisher had sent it in for the competition. No. Suddenly, I just got this email one day and said, "Congratulations, you've won the Penn Oakland Award."
Oh my God! So you've won quite a few awards, I saw. And what one did you feel you felt most happy about, I guess?
I'm not sure that I can rank them in that way, because I think they each mean very different things, and in some, while they're drastically different from one another, they have equal weight because of maybe even many idiosyncratic things. Like Penn, for example, that I was very aware of it. I'd also had work that was acknowledged by the National Book Critics Circle, and that's another organization that is a very young, aspiring writer. I thought, wow, who gets to get recognition from them? So I've been very lucky that a number of people and organizations have supported my work.
Yeah, that's great. So what are the, if you don't mind me asking, some of the criticisms you've got throughout time about different pieces or different works from different people?
Wow, let's see. I think about the strangest one, strangest bit of critique I got was only recently for a new novel. And it was in some review in which the reviewer was taking issue with the voice of one of the characters, and I don't know. I suppose he felt that it didn't ring true to him, and I'm not sure you can ever really anticipate what people are going to like or dislike about your work. Yeah,
that's true. So can you talk a little bit about your experience here at Oneonta and the theater and the play that you've had and everything that's going on right now with you?
Well, I've kind of a long relationship with Oneonta.
Oh, yeah? Ongoing relationship here? Can't get away from it?
Susan Bernardin, a faculty member here, contacted me, I don't even remember what year it was now, so it's been quite a while, to come and do a reading on campus, and I'm guessing it was maybe 6 years ago. I mean, it seems like it's been a substantial amount of time. And she's a scholar of native writing, and so we've remained in contact. And subsequently, another friend of mine has ended up working here in the English department, George Hovis, who I knew from a totally separate institution when he worked in Kentucky. And he invited me back a couple of years ago, and so it seems like every few years I show up back at Oneonta. And so last year they asked me if I were interested in pursuing this kind of multidisciplinary thing, and I thought, yeah, it seems like a great opportunity, and so I had an initial meeting in September with theater faculty and fine arts faculty and English faculty as well. And we laid out initial plans for what this was eventually going to be. And as part of the process, Patriot Act, the play that was read last night, became part of an offshoot of that. There's a series on campus, the Identity Play series, and so when I had been talking with Drew in theater just about what his various projects were, he happened to mention this series, and he said, well, do you have anything else? And I said, well, I've got kind of, much more standard play, because the piece I'm doing in April is more at the experimental end. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, this is a more traditional 3-act play, so if you're interested, I'll send it your way. So I sent it to him, and he was interested, and it was terrific. Fairly late in the process, he said he was concerned about casting the lead, which is a middle-aged Native woman. He said, do you have anybody in mind? He said, I can't really think of anybody we might find on campus or in the nearby community. And I thought, well, there's really only one person I can think of, and she'd probably say no. She's, a multiple Grammy Award-winning singer, and so she has a tremendous career. She's traveling the world a lot. And I said, well, but here's her contact information. Her name is Joanne Shenandoah, and I think the worst that can happen is she'll just decline. And much to my shock, and apparently the shock of others, she said yes. And so it was really terrific to have her come down and be the lead in this piece. It's the first time I've heard actors who are reading it, so it's great to finally hear a piece of theater being performed by people who know what they're doing. You can hear where it's a little bit slow or where it really sings, and it was terrific. The audience was, the room was full, and the audience seemed very engaged. So it's a great experience. I don't know how it wouldn't be a great experience, though.
Right. And you also spent some time at Hartwick, too, right, a little bit? Or
not this time.
Okay.
I have in the past,
yep.
yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I think that may have been my very first trip out here, was something that was initially sponsored partly by Hartwick. And that would have been the early 90s, so quite a time ago. Yeah.
So what are you currently working on right now, if anything, as far as plays or...
I'm always working on multiple things.
Okay.
And so I've got a couple of novels that are creeping toward completion. I probably need to revise both of them at least one more time. And another book of poems. And there's another project that's really kind of a mess right now, so I'm not sure even what form it's going to take.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
Well, it's sure, yeah. It's probably most difficult because it's got some rigid parameters to it, in that it's based on the Beatles' Abbey Road album.
Oh,
so each little segment of it is
favorites.
Yeah, oh great.
Yeah, I love Beatles.
So each segment of it is defined by the title of each song in sequence from Abbey Road. So that in some ways really keeps a closely defined structure to each piece of it. So it's a challenge, and I'm interested in the challenge. It may not work ultimately, but that's kind of what I keep going back to right now.
Yeah. Any plays that you have in mind coming up that you want to do, or thinking of any ideas?
Well, right now the piece that's going to be here in April, which is it's a performance piece, so it's a drama and monologue and digital projections and set design. It's kind of a hybrid. I still have to finish working on it, so that takes the forefront right now.
Yeah. So what's the future going to hold for you as far as, everything's concerned?
I don't know. I think that one of the things that's really nice about the way I work is there are always multiple possibilities out there. That I have probably 4 or 5 partial manuscripts that I only go back to when I think I'm ready to work on that particular piece. So if I were to even just take those into consideration, there's probably the next decade is already planned out in some form or another.
Yeah. So do you think that you see yourself maybe even writing movies or short films at some point?
I really don't know. It seems to me that would be really nice.
Yeah.
But from what little I know of that world, it seems like a pretty tough place to break into if you aren't able to commit your full-time life to it. And since I have a full-time job that keeps me in Buffalo for even I can travel to places like this for 5 or 6 days and get back and teach again.
Right.
But someplace that's going to require you to be absent from your regular life for 9 months, it seems unlikely that that I would be able to finagle that. So as much as I would love to, it just seems unrealistic for where I'd like to go.
You have like family life and stuff back at Buffalo too, and it's hard to, I'm sure, travel all around all the time with that going on. And
I think when you're younger, you have this love affair with traveling, and it's really exciting, and you like being out there. And I definitely have done that for a long time, but I think as you get older too, it gets so much more complicated that sometimes I just want to sit home and
not do any of it.
Yeah, not do any of it. Just kind of maybe write or paint, not talk to other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's really one of the things that happens is people who become writers tend to be people who aren't particularly social or aren't great conversationalists. I think some people are really natural conversationalists and are great personalities, and I also believe they can become very successful writers because they are able to willingly embrace the PR element of going out and giving talks and book tours and so forth. So it's been kind of an interesting shift in the culture that the writer has come to this point where it's the writer personality to some degree.
Do any of your novel, The Mending Skins, right? Does any of these novels that you write, does it come from personal experiences, or where's your guys' ideas come from?
I would say it's probably a blender. Certainly, some pieces have come from my life or from the lives of friends, and then you mix it up with other things that you're just thinking about and making up. I certainly have no qualms about using those things, but I also have no qualms about altering them to make them a better story.
Right.
So they're not really memoir in any fashion. They're fiction.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your novels and what they're about, the novels that you wrote?
Sure. The first one, Indian Summers, it's kind of largely a family novel, and it's about a couple of generations within a family. And that one generation is aging and I guess really beginning to die off, and how the next generation is maturing into adulthood and recognizing that all these people who have been in their lives are beginning to pass, and that they then become responsible for carrying on family memory. Second novel, Smoke Dancing, is largely a political novel about and I guess maybe in some ways it's a little bit outdated, and then in other ways very, very much of the moment, in that it's about conflicts being raised concerning tax-free gasoline and cigarettes. So even though that was a really hot-button issue about a decade ago, it's also begun to resurface with issues of New York State trying to find ways of collecting taxes on those very things.
Yeah. Right.
And the third and fourth novels are kind of tied together. They're part of a
series.
Yeah, and I think there is a third one. I'm partway through, but it's a couple of years from being done. And they're largely about an actor a man who wanted to be an actor, and who went off to Hollywood to try to do this in the 1960s from a reservation, thinking that since Hollywood tends to cast non-Indigenous people in the roles of Indigenous characters, that it was because they just hadn't had actors from Indigenous communities. So he believes he's going to go out there and change this. And he fails, and eventually commits suicide. And so the books are really about the repercussions of that whole set of events.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about acting. Have you ever been interested in it, or have you ever acted yourself in any of your works, or someone else's works, or?
Not since Bugs Bunny in the third grade. I think that was about my last acting job.
Just not for you?
Well, when I read from my work, and I do a lot of readings, I travel around the country and give, I guess what you'd call dramatic readings of my written work. I think there's a certain degree of acting in there, but I think I don't have the memorization skills that are required of actors, and timing, and I'm sure a whole host of other skills and talents that are just absent from my abilities, that I don't even know I'm missing because I haven't moved in that direction very much.
Okay, so for your plays, then, do you cast your own actors and actresses, or how does that work when it comes to that?
Well, a director selects your work.
Yep.
And then they get the process going, and if it's a professional theater, or even, I suppose, a theater and academic theater, they then do a casting call, and interested parties apply, and then they do selection. So no, usually by the time I get there, all of that stuff is done.
Right. So you write poems a little bit too, right?
Not a little bit, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
And where do they come from? Where are they just, how do you come up with ideas for those?
Well, I think a lot of what I'm working on, I'm never sure which particular form they're going to take. So sometimes it's trial and error.
Yep.
I may work on something and I think it's a poem, but then clearly it's getting longer and longer, and so I think, oh, that must be a short story instead. So for me, I think there are a lot of different schools of poetry. I tend to lean more toward the narrative school, so really my poems are like very compressed short stories.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I actually haven't had the opportunity to read any of that, but I definitely am interested in it,
nice.
so, you never know. So actually, I have a personal question for you. Now, how many kids do you have?
0 kids.
Oh, no kids. Okay. I was going to say,
Yeah.
I was wondering if they have any
no, I mean,
interest in some of the things you do. That's what I was wondering.
I have a lot of nieces and nephews.
Okay.
And it's been kind of funny because I'm the youngest of 7 siblings, and my siblings have very little interest in what I do.
Yeah.
They were very much sports enthusiasts, and all of my older brothers were kind of championship lacrosse players. We had a lot of trophies in the house from their lacrosse games and so forth. So I think they don't know where I came from ultimately, because they're, I had no interest in what they were doing, and so I think consequently they have no interest in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But their children, in the time that they've been raised, I've been a professional artist, so it's just for them sort of what I do. And it's been great to have them around because I think they're used to my weird ideas.
Yeah.
So if I'm working on something and I need working on a painting and I need a model for, just to take a couple of photographs for reference, my nieces and nephews have been relatively willing to say, okay, yeah, I'll do that, and so that's been great. Yeah.
That's great then. Well, Eric, it's been great to have you on our show today, and
Thanks.
It's great talking to you, and I really appreciate you coming in and speaking with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me in this edition of SUNY Oneonta's In Discussion. Please join us for future programs and check us out on YouTube at www.youtube.com/SUNY Oneonta. I'm Jacqueline Grady. Thanks for watching.